You're listening to the Surgeons of Horror podcast.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Hello, welcome to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. Its purpose is to dissect and discuss classic horror films, but also contemporary new ones as well. As we kick off the fourth season of our podcast, we're going to kind of look at the great late George A. Romero's work. And what better way to start it off than to talk about his first film, Night of the Living Dead. As always, I'm your lead host for the podcast discussions, Saul Muerte. And joining me is fresh new blood on the scene. We've got a new surgeon in the midst, and by none other than Oscar Jack. Welcome, Oscar.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Look, it's awesome to have, as I said, off record, and for the listeners out there to have new blood come in and kind of offer a fresh take on these things, which is always insightful and great because it always offers a new perspective. But just to give a bit of a background as to who you are to our listeners out there and any new listeners that are coming on board for that matter. What is it? Who are you first and foremost? And we met. Maybe I'll give a bit of background as to how we met, but it was during a performance by a team called Hunted, which is kind of a horror interactive live experience. Normally would put on kind of a horror themed interactive play, essentially, isn't it? And more importantly, I would say location is key for these performances as well, because they really set the tone of the piece. Yeah. And you were one of the performers that were on there. But tell the people, as I said, about a little bit about maybe who you are and what you do, what makes you tick.
Yeah, well, I'm an actor, as you mentioned. I'm also a writer and filmmaker. I've been doing all those things for about 12, 13 years. So I'm always just sort of stumbling and fumbling my way through creative ventures and, making films. Made a couple, I guess you'd call them horror films.
Sure.
Semi-recently made a horror comedy that I've just started editing today, which is, very exciting to see that kind of work pop up about giant cockroaches.
Sweet.
Yeah, strange stuff. Like I love the absurd. I love, that magical realism that is so inherent in so much horror.
Yes.
Is something that like resonates with me in all the work that I do, and I think it's one of the big reasons that I love horror so much and why it's been such a big part of my filmmaking education and inspiration, and kind of what put the fires in my belly when I was, a teenager.
Sure. Well, let's touch on that. Like, what? So, I mean, you're talking about being a creator. Actually, firstly, do you want to mention the name of your short, or is that to be disclosed?
It's called Roaches.
Roaches. Cool.
It's called Roaches, and it should be out in the next couple months. I'll be posting it all over the place as soon as it's ready to be seen by the light of day.
Yeah, great. Well, like the time we're recording this like early, so for listeners out there, we're recording this in July, but I'm aiming to release this around the time that Night of the Living Dead is celebrating its 50th year. 50 years! I can't believe that this classic has reached such a pinnacle moment of time in film history, but 50 years ago it was released, and that's around October time. So your movie may well already be out there by the time we come round to it. But let's maybe just touch on what is it that draws you to horror, especially? Is there any kind of filmmakers or genre style within, like subgenres within horror, that always pulls you in? What is it that you kind of find yourself gravitating towards?
Well, I mean, I was like, as a kid, I was terrified of everything. I was like the biggest scaredy cat. I think like the first, horror film that I ever watched all the way through was like Gremlins.
Yeah.
But I just remember things would stick in my mind. Mm-hmm. The images that would just keep on repeating, watching Jaws when I was like 13 years old, and I was terrified to go into a pool. for the next considerable little while. But then at some point when I was maybe like 14, 15, something in my brain just the switch just flicked.
Yes.
I stopped looking away from the screen and I started being interested in what was happening and the artistry that went into it.
Sure, yeah.
Like going to my my local, civic video when it still existed, and the horror section of the video store I was always just pulled towards it. Picking up VHS tapes and looking at the back, and that used to fulfill my adrenaline. That was just like, oh, that's all I needed to see, is read a little bit, watch the look at the creepy kids on the back of the Village of the Damned, VHS, and being
absolutely
like, just letting that run my imagination. But then, it's just the law of diminishing returns, and I think that's my relationship with horror. In terms of looking for the thrill, it's like I want to see a movie that affects me in a really, like, in a satisfying way, not in a cheap jump scare. I want something that sits with me and makes me just wow at what they've done, especially horror nowadays.
Yeah, we're going through this huge renaissance, and with horror at the moment, which is for horror fans out there, like, it's so great to kind of see it suddenly thrust back into the limelight once again. And I mentioned this in a previous podcast. Looking at the likes of how Jordan Peele's Get Out has been kind of making waves. Hereditary more recently as well.
Yep.
And they're kind of what I call thinking person's horror as well. There's a lot of intellectual kind of stuff going on with these movies, and it's kind of refreshing to see, because I think up to maybe 3 years ago, horror films have always kind of been kind of this paint by numbers kind of approach to filmmaking, I felt, and we were in a bit of a lull. There were exceptions, don't get me wrong. There were kind of little flickers and pulses along the way. But this is encouraging to see that this kind of momentum is kind of shifting slightly.
And you always find that it does. Like, every now and again, a horror film will come out, and like Misery or Carrie, something that mainstream critical recognition. And then that kind of like keeps it all going, and then it dwindles off and gets really, reductive, and then another incredibly inspiring horror film comes out, and it just sets it all on fire again.
That's right. I mean, that's what keeps us pulling back. I mean, I guess, look, this is a good kind of segue now to kind of talk about the subject at hand that we're here to discuss, which is Night of the Living Dead, George A. Romero's first ever film. As I mentioned, it's celebrating 50 years. What do you? It's kind of interesting to talk about these what are called these older classic films, because they're so embedded in the psyche, and any horror genre fan kind of instinctively knows these films, whether they've seen them or not. I mean, there's a reason, like, Romero basically reinvented the term zombie, and set up a lot of rules and stuff that are now kind of repeated today. I mean, you only need to watch The Walking Dead, and everything that's embedded in that is taken from Romero, and they've acknowledged that too, even with when he passed away last year. The team behind The Walking Dead had a honorary episode devoted to him. But what do you recall the first time you ever saw the film yourself, or was it so like entrenched in your mind that it's almost like you kind of don't recall that first ever time?
No, I remember very distinctly. It was when I had just gotten into filmmaking really, really hardcore, and horror was kind of my gateway into that. And so it was in the pile of 10 weekly DVDs that I picked up, and I remember being so inspired by it because I wanted to. At the end of high school, I wanted to make my own zombie movie that was, set in one house. It was like, pure Night of the Living Dead inspired.
Sure.
And I'd seen that, saw that. I actually think the Zack Snyder Dawn of the Dead was the first one that I'd seen.
Yes.
Which kind of piqued my interest and made me look a little closer. And so when I saw, did some research and found out it was a remake of, the 78 classic, and following down the line of, this is the first one, chucking it on. And I just remember really loving it. Which is kind of a bit surprising because, some of the absolute classics are a bit hard to sit through. It's
you find it, and I think that's the problem with modern age viewing too, because the nature of storytelling has changed so much, along with the craft of filmmaking itself. And so when we watch these classics, and we just did Rosemary's Baby recently, and as much as I love that film, I was talking to my colleague Nico, for the podcast, and I said that and this is something I find hard with Polanski. I do love the majority of his work, not all of them, but the pace of his films are so slow. And that would be my one criticism of Rosemary's Baby, is that it feels long. It's a bit dated too. It's very much in that kind of late 60s kind of period, and it's very much of New York in that time as well. So it's kind of hard to shift from that. So if you're coming from it from a modern gaze, it's very easy for people to just tune out. And the same could go in hand with this, the Night of the Living Dead. It's shot. It's all black and white. It's very insular in the way it's kind of shot, primarily because they were restricted to filming in one location.
Tiny budget.
Yeah, small budget, nothing to work on, and they were shooting with increments at a time, whatever they could do to kind of get a little bit of money. Okay, shoot the next bit, come back, and so. But it's kind of one of the reasons why I think it's successful is that claustrophobic feeling that you get because it's set in one location, with everything kind of out, the outside creeping in. And we can talk about all the imagery and the metaphors that come with that have been carefully criticized over the years, which wasn't necessarily Romero's intention, but is definitely something that's lent in its favor as time's worn on. So it's definitely a kind of an interesting one to get into. I'm going to be quite controversial. I'll probably say it's probably not one of my favorite black and white horror films. And I know you were talking about things that are a little bit interesting. And I don't know if you've ever seen it before, but it's a film called Carnival of Souls. If you haven't seen it, I so recommend you watch it. It's a bit weird and out there and interesting. I think it's I highly, highly recommend it.
I've written it down.
Do it. But that's not to, as I say, to take away from this, because a lot of kind of political messaging that comes across in this film, as does a lot of Romero's films after this too. And that's why when it first came out, it was quite easily rebuffed. But the closer critics have looked at it, they've realized that it was actually quite a smart little gem ticking away. Let's have a little look at the film itself, because as I said already, we'll go through the plot line, as it were. And as already kind of mentioned, it is primarily shot in one location, but we do get a little bit kind of outside of the main kind of farmhouse or house that it's all set in before it kind of gets going. And I am deliberately kind of goofing a bit because I'm trying to set up my window and see you at the same time, Oscar. Okay. So let's look at the plot line. So right from the get-go, we're kind of introduced to Barbara and her brother Johnny, and they are going to visit their father's grave. So we kind of pretty much they drive in. That we're in this kind of cemetery area, And look, cemeteries are at kind of an eerie place anyway, but this is something that the tone of the movie is already kind of set quite succinctly from the get-go here. It feels eerie and a bit off-center. They're the only two people there, and that's makes the location even more desolate. And not that, like, you know, if you were to go to a cemetery, it is a bit like that anyway. But it's just the way it's kind of shot and the camera angles as well, and the movement as it's following it.
The soundtrack, the score is brilliant in that opening. It immediately, like on the rewatch, I was just like, this immediately hooks me in. I'm so interested, and I can't even like quantify it in my brain. It's it's been almost 10 years since I had watched it.
Yeah.
The first time, I haven't watched it a whole lot. It doesn't have a whole lot of views in my book, but it sucks right back into it.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I probably would agree. I haven't. I'd say it's been a fair. I mean, obviously, I rewatched it prior to our discussions, but I'd probably say it's been a while since I'd watched it before that. But this is what I find about these kind of classic films, is like that shouldn't kind of with that statement, it kind of might sound like it's not, you know, does it warrant repeat viewing? But it's like you said, when you do watch them, it does draw you back in, and that says something about the film, that it's able to do that on repeat viewing as well. So like, yes, we as I said, we're seeing, you know, Barbara and Johnny kind of going through the graveyard, and there's this kind of strange kind of person that's following Barbara around a bit in the background, and it's kind of a bit dismissed and not really looked at. And there's this whole bit where she's obviously I would say she's an incredibly anxious person, by nature, right? And so, totally. and you're getting that sense already. And
Johnny's bringing up, you know, he's pulling up the childhood anxieties for her. You used to hate this place, and starts playing the childhood game again. They're coming to get you, Barbara.
And how often has that quote been mentioned as well? Like it's
so brilliant.
It's been riffed so many times off things, but you know, it's, you know, I still say it now. Like, you know, it's like
my grandmother is named Barbara, so it's so embedded in my life.
Nice, I love it. But like, so I guess like the growing sense of dread is something that hits hard in this film right from the beginning, because Johnny is kind of joking around. They don't realize how serious the danger is, because you know, he's the one that ends up kind of getting attacked by this kind of, well, it's a zombie. They never say the word zombie in the film.
This ghoul.
That's right. So Johnny kind of hits his head, basically, essentially, in the struggle, and he's killed, leaving Barbara kind of on her own. And there's this great moment where she's kind of stumbling around, and she finally kind of ends her way back into the car. And, you know, this it's that image of that, you know, the ghoul coming up to the face of the screen. It's just,
he's an interesting looking guy as well. Their first ghoul, he's tall. He's got, you know, this long, interesting looking face. He's a bit of a lurch kind of Adam Sandler kind of looking guy.
Yeah, I like that analogy. Yeah, he's got this kind of a really interesting look, and like, you pretty much, if you look on any the majority of any of the Night of the Living Dead kind of poster stills or covers, he's the one that is pictured on it too. His presence is needed, like, to be odd. I don't know how they went around with the casting of that character, but in order for this to be successful, that first ghoul needed to have an interesting look, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like it pursues her down, you know, she's got the car and she's She doesn't. She drives it in reverse, doesn't she? Kind of down and like, well, lets the handbrake off, and
yeah, because Johnny's got the key.
That's it. That's right.
Yeah. So he, the ghoul smashes in a window and he picks up a rock.
Yeah.
And he's like trying to open the door. Watching this for the first time.
Yeah.
When you hadn't like watching it in like the drive-in when you'd never seen a zombie movie before, you just be there being like, what is happening? Like, what is this guy's deal? He's still kind of he's out of it. He's in the daze, and as it just like viewing this movie from that lens, I think is really important.
Absolutely.
Like it gives so much more weight to it. Something that has been riffed on and repeated and copied and pasted so many times. Watching it this is the first is important.
I absolutely. It's a great little it's a great little moment, and like you just reminded me too. Like it's probably a good point to kind of mention that when this film came out, there was no kind of I guess classification. Like so, it was actually open to kids to go and watch too. Because nothing like this had been made, and it's pretty gory in places. Like for the time,
violent, really
it's violent. Yeah, and so like there's like 6-year-old, 9-year-old kids watching it, thinking they're if you predate this, like thinking they're going to go and see like your Universal horror kind of Frankenstein kind of films, which is very tame in comparison, still menacing, but kind of or it's comedy horror, that's kind of, the whole Abbott and Costello kind of stuff was right.
Meet Mummy and Meet Frankenstein. And
yeah. So they're going in thinking that, that's what horror is. And something Romero's never shied away from in the entirety of his filmmaking career was to pull back on the gore factor and make it as believable as possible. So all of a sudden, like you got these, like people were saying, have recounted about the first time they went to see it, and there's like 9-year-old kids crying their eyes out at the horror they are witnessing. Like, what the hell is this? It's a very bleak movie too. It's not like it's no kind of fluffy dice kind of moment. So yeah, I just found that kind of interesting. So anyway, to kind of come back to the plot line. So, Barbara essentially she does kind of make her way out by,
rolling down the hill,
essentially, crashing the car. And then kind of stumbling out, and the figure's still kind of lurching its way towards her. And she kind of makes her way to this house, essentially.
I'll jump in just there in that because when she crashes the car, I was reading that was born out of necessity because the owner of the car crashed it in between when they'd started filming and when they were supposed to go back. The owner I think they were the auntie of the producer. She dinged in the side of the car, so there's like this beautiful close-up as when they crash, and he's like, that's like low-budget filmmaking, like use it.
That's right. You have to make it work.
It's great. Yeah, she crashes the car, and you see a massive dent that immediately gives you production value, and pops out and starts stumbling towards the little house on the prairie. Little farmhouse.
It's interesting too. I'm jumping ahead to the next Dead feature film, which I will do for the podcast down the track, which was Dawn of the Dead, which iconically was shot in a shopping mall. And there is a sequence where there is a car that's taken through that, and they got it for free from a sales lot with the intention of returning. People that are familiar with the film have seen that they trashed that car. And they basically kind of take it back and go, oh, yeah, thanks. They weren't well liked for that. But, yeah, what you do for the sake of getting the film done. and experimenting and stuff, which Romero was really one of the things that he's been applauded for is the fact that he was open to creativity from all avenues, behind the scenes and even in front of the camera. And a lot of the actors have kind of, expressed how free he was able to let them be with exploring their character and trying different things. Like they often come up to him and go, "Oh, can I try this out?" And you're like, "Yeah, sure. Let's do it." Which is kind of a little bit fresh, especially when you look at films these days. I'm not saying that there aren't directors that do it, but
it's the idea of the auteur.
Exactly, yeah.
The Kubrick, they want control over everything and ownership over everything, and
that's it. Yeah. But it's also because films these days are time precious, so there isn't that flexibility to kind of go, yeah, that's okay, you can try something out, because they're like, no, we have 10 days to shoot this thing. We don't have time to kind of fluff around. We've got to make sure all the shots are nailed down tight. So that tends to be the way of things, unfortunately. And a lot of freedom's been lost in a lot of, modern kind of filmmaking, which is, again, we're talking about, people talk about how the 70s and 80s in horror are still kind of like that golden era. And it's because they were allowed to have that freedom to create stuff. You only need to look at the likes of Evil Dead with Sam Raimi as an example, amongst a plethora of others, which I could go into detail, but I won't, where they were actually able to kind of just really, they were always kind of young, independent filmmakers, guerrilla style, and just for the love of it and the thrill of it, were able to kind of knock something together, which held strong and true and resonates on the screen. And this is an example with Romero's work, both in this and in Dawn of the Dead, which is pretty cool. So look, as I said, so Barbara does end up at this house, and she kind of manages to get inside, and then this is where we meet, I guess he's our hero, our lead protagonist. Essentially, like, you're kind of led to believe it's Barbara at first, but she's so shell-shocked for the majority of the film that this other character comes in called Ben, and he's played by Dwayne Jones. And one of the big things that was highlighted within this film was that he was an African-American actor. Apparently, like, that wasn't an intentional thing on Romero's part, but so much has been picked up on the fact that this is pretty much the first time that we've seen in film history an African-American actor play a hero role on what essentially would become a mainstream film. And there's a lot to be kind of said about that, particularly as there's been a lot of likeness around this film towards the impact that the Vietnam War had on American society, particularly with the African Americans who went out, fought for their country, came back, and were basically kind of ignored, and never kind of held in as high praise as the Caucasian Americans, and without jumping towards the end, the way this film ends kind of almost highlights that fact, to the point. And we'll get to that when we do come to it. It's interesting too, though, because his career-wise didn't kind of stem too much outside of that. He was a teacher as well, and he was an incredibly well-scholared gentleman. So it's kind of interesting having someone of that stature kind of playing a very kind of horror at this point was incredibly kind of, it's even to this day is never really considered highbrow unless you get into the likes of the recent wave of films, as we discussed at the beginning of the podcast. but yeah, he didn't really kind of do a lot. On theatre, he did. He was quite a huge presence in the theatre scene. But when it came to film, like his only real kind of two highlights was another horror film called Gander and Hess in 1973, and there was a film around like the mid 80s called Beat Street that he kind of played a role in. He was only 51 when he passed away as well, so he was quite young. But he will still always go down in history for the role he played within, Night of the Living Dead. So just repeat his name again, Dwayne Jones. And he's solid in this film. He plays that kind of the hero arc to a T.
He's so proactive. He's like resourceful. He immediately comes in and he's doing all the right things. That kind of it's funny because I've just been reading Matt Ruff's Lovecraft Country.
Oh yeah,
which Jordan Peele's developing into a TV series. And the main character in that, it's set in the 50s, but the main character is a African-American veteran. And it's a very similar kind of vibe where he's got a confidence about him.
Yes.
And a certainty that I feel like that as a background would totally make sense. If he had fought, because he doesn't take flack from anyone in this movie. No. He lays the law down, and he's an authority in this film, one who fights for it and fights for that survival, which makes the ending so tragic, because he does fight for that survival and earn it with such vigor.
Yeah, he does.
Gusto.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Like he's the only one that really has strength in his convictions too. But that we do meet a couple a little bit like the typical kind of nuclear American family in a bit, and we will get to them. But that Harry character from that couple were. He tries to be that too, but he's so trapped in his mindset of how things are supposed to be that he doesn't have that flexibility to adapt to the surroundings and the impact that's happening to him and his family. Whereas Ben does that, and he's often trying to assess the situation.
As it's coming up, it's present.
Presence, that's it. Yeah. He's taken a leaf out of Eckhart Tolle's kind of mindset. And, it's not about the past or the future; it's about the now.
About the now, the power of now.
The power of now. But it's true though, because and that's the thing. You often see that. I mean, off the top of my head, I kind of instinctively think of Gene Hackman's character in the Poseidon Adventure, where this kind of very kind of we need to be doing this. The only way to survive is that we need to get from here to here. And there's a similar kind of approach to Ben's character within this too. But when he does come in, he's the one he starts barricading up the doors and stuff and gets tables and whatever he can find, and
checks the radio, checks food, checks what weapons there are, nails, hammers.
That's it. Yeah, he's on it.
It's like he's a big zombie movie fan. He had his plan, his zombie survival plan.
That's right.
So many of us have, and I've thought about it time to time, but he was the first to have it.
That's it, exactly. He was the first ever doomsday prepper out there. I've been waiting for this moment. It's interesting, isn't it? So and it's him that finds the radio too, isn't it, as well? And he's the one that starts trying to pick up and find out what's been going on. We start to kind of learn a bit about his background a bit later on. But he's the one that's trying to get a reaction from Barbara, who's just completely shell-shocked, as I said.
She's seen a body upstairs.
That's right.
The great, ping pong ball eye, drippy, gross corpse. Yeah, Barbara's not having a good time.
No, she's not. It's like all sweet and niceties and that kind of wholesome American girl who's suddenly confronted with the unimaginable. Yeah, so look, it's and yeah, you're right. He's the one that finds the rifle too, and he keeps trying to get conversation going because he's trying to get her to act essentially because it's her inability to act that he already knows will be her downfall and potentially his if she doesn't kind of snap out of it. So he's trying to kind of get a rise out of her, and it's at some point they discover that there is a cellar to this kind of farmhouse as well. And this is where we then meet this kind of married couple, Harry and Helen Cooper, and they have a young daughter called Karen as well. And it's kind of like immediately they think that they're the owners of the house, but we soon come to learn that they, like Ben and Barbara, are using this place as a refuge. And then we get, sorry,
Mr. Cooper. Watching it struck me. I was like, he's like a sitcom dad. He's like he's a '60s sitcom dad, or like the cranky neighbor, or like and it just it's a thing I love about watching this is the melding of acting.
Yes,
because Dwayne, who plays Ben, is coming from like more naturalistic.
Yes,
that's his acting. His style of acting does feel a lot closer to like a modern sensibility, whereas Mr. Cooper and all of the others, it's all gee sir, gee this and golly that, and they feel like ripped straight from one of those '60s shows.
And I think what's interesting about those characters as well is, and I think you're hitting the nail on the head there, Oscar, is that they are representative of the old America that was affected by the Second World War. They're like the original baby boomers, right? That have dealt with what they believe was death and destruction as they knew it, albeit far removed because it's the kids were sent away to kind of do this thing. Whereas for me, Ben's character is representative of the Vietnamese War and the impact that had on those kids at the time. And it was a very different war. It was a lot more confronting because cameras, for the first time, were able to go out and kind of record stuff pretty upfront and confrontational. And he is representative of that. And I think that's what worked with the different kind of acting styles that you were mentioning, because it does they are a juxtaposition to each other. And I think that's kind of why it works, particularly as, to then arc back to the fact that Ben's the one that's the one that's active. Everyone else is being reactive.
They've been hiding down in the cellar.
That's it.
For I think it's like hours. Like they've been down there a while, and
they have been. Yeah,
they heard the first kind of zombie attack, and
that's right.
They've come out after all of this, and they want to take the radio down. They want to take it all down there and hide in that foxhole. But Ben knows that that's a terrible idea.
Yeah, because he's like, if we go down there, we have no escape route. Like we're bunkered down. We don't, and he's right. Like the thing is, he's right. Like in his analogy, it's like that is like the last place that we'll go to, and obviously that's where they end up having to go to because they get overwhelmed. But he does everything he can to make that the last option possible. And there is conflict already that's highlighted at this point too. You have that Harry Cooper trying to be the patriarchal kind of figure, and there's conflict between young and old, and there's another couple that come into the scene too. I don't think I'm trying to think. I've got then Tom and Judy, isn't it? are their names, and they come into the equation a bit later on. We'll get to them, but like they are still kind of like reluctant to change, or it's like it'll pass. You know, like if we just do nothing, everything will be okay, and they don't realize the gravitas of the situation that they're in.
And they've got their daughter Karen. She's ill. She's injured. She's downstairs, lying on a flat surface, and one of the great zombie tropes is like it's used like potentially. I think it's one of the best times it's been used because spoilers is that she's been bitten.
Yeah,
and she will turn, but that happens within the last 20 minutes, last 15 minutes of the film.
That's right. Yeah,
but it is just this like the more you learn about the zombies. The more you learn, you kind of realize the dread of, oh no, she's been, everyone who dies is coming back a zombie,
That's right. And that's the thing too, like, and there is a moment where you feel for their plight too, because they are trying to protect their daughter. They know that something bad's happening, and it's every parent's worst nightmare is to want to support and protect your children, and they haven't been able to do that, and they're in denial at what's about to become. And that's what I'm saying. They're stuck. They are as characters. They are rigid, and they do not shift. And unfortunately, because of that, they're like the Hamlets of this piece. They fail to act, and their failure to act leads to consequences down the track that are beyond their own, outside of their own peripheral space. That the walls will keep encroaching in, and there's not a lot they can do about it. And it's this is a massive tragedy waiting to unfold. So like you said, you've mentioned that Karen's the daughter's been bitten, and it's only that when Ben has turned the radio on is what brings them up, and that's when we're able to kind of meet them. Barbara kind of does come out of her shock status at this point too. She does become a bit more not one of the living dead at this moment, and is starting to be a bit more focused on what's happening. They do try and kind of barricade the outside a bit more again. They, after that first wave, they try and do that again. This is where, when they're listening to the radio, they find a television. That's right, and they you get this kind of stuff that's unfolding in the outside world, and they kind of start to realize how big it is. There's, we see scientists and stuff and the US military as well, kind of expressing, what's been happening. And there's a scientist that mentions, radioactivity at some point and contamination, and nothing. It's all very kind of loose and nothing really concrete, but that kind of adds to that whole mystery of what's unfolding.
Natural disaster. It's they've got the emergency broadcast going on. These are going through the list of towns with where the safe points are, and like, because this film's like it's a drama. It's like an Edward Albee play. It's like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. It's just all within this one house of these people from different age people kind of clashing, and every now and again we'll go to the TV, which just takes us out, and we get another piece of what's happening out in the world, and makes the world so bigger.
It does too, and this is something like there's 2 points that you just kind of were raising there, which I wouldn't mind your school of thought on. One of them more is just exactly that point. They are kind of self-contained in this kind of house, as it were, and TV would have been still a fairly new medium at this point, and it was the resource that a lot of families would go to get their source from what's happening outside, and this is their only way of doing that. And everything that they are being fed then leads to their actions within that house and the impact that it has. And so it was interesting that, whether that was an intentional commentary from Romero or not, of how TV does fuel our actions, and how we approach things. And the other thing that I just wanted to get particularly as I said, your school of thought on is coming from an actor's point of view, because I can really see this set up really well as a theatre production.
Yeah,
because it's all in one space, and having these kind of dynamics interplay. And as you know, the sign of any decent play or written piece, is the drama that comes out of conflict. You can't have drama without conflict. And this is ripe with it. Not only do they have the conflict bearing down outside their walls, but it has a significant impact on the people within those walls, and the dynamics and the shifts that happen within that. If you were to see this in a modern setting, how would you place that? And could you see that working in a theatre environment still?
I can't believe I'd never thought about it, but like this would make such a great piece of stage, of theatre, and you'd be able to do it as well because it's not under copyright laws.
Yeah.
Being because they didn't have the little C with the title in the beginning, so people have like remixed this, and it's all over the internet, and copyright free. You can.
Yeah, that's right. And there's been like a colorized version of this that's come out as well, and you name it, it's done it. So, but personally, I'd love to see an adaptation of this on the theatre. I think it would be kind of interesting. And also just to kind of throw it out there, it's similarly to what the Hunted team did, to have that kind of group of the audience coming into that space and having this external stuff happening, and have the key players driving that kind of direction through, would be really interesting to see how that plays out.
Oh yeah. You take a small group, pick sides. That could change the course of the play.
That's right.
I think there's
something there, man.
I think there's a hunger. Like people are this kind of immersive theatre. This stuff that people might not recognize as immersive theatre.
Yes.
Like I know in Sydney, and I think in Melbourne and a couple of the capital cities, they do Z-Town.
Yes, that's right.
The big giant Nerf gun game of zombie tag.
Yes.
And that is people. I went to one last year, and there was 1,000 people out at Homebush in Sydney, and it was like incredible. And people, it's impossible not to get into it, to not like get hyped up and get
anxious
and get freaking out when you see zombies running towards you. You've only got a couple people left, and
nice, man.
Zombie horror. That's the next. It's not the next step. It's like it's a parallel step of people watching movies, and maybe that doesn't get it for you. So bring it out into the real world, and get chased by actual blood-splattered people. And
there's such a big rise of it. You only need to look at like the escape rooms as well, and things that are set up like that. People are kind of wanting that kind of a bit more of that experience that comes with it. It'd be really interesting to see where that takes it, and whether that kind of picks up a bit more. I mean, Z-Town's only one of a number of these kind of little experiences that you can go on, as you said. So it'd be interesting to see. So where were we? So back to Night of the Living Dead, once again, Ben finds the medical kit, and he's got that for Karen to kind of help. There are reports coming through, I think, again on the TV, about rescue centres that are offering refuge. So that's what makes them think about, can they make it to these places? And they look outside, and there's I think it actually is Ben's truck, and they think, well, is there a way that we can kind of get to that too?
Because they need gas, because there's a gas outlet locked. So that's why Ben had come to this place initially.
Yes, that's right. That's right. That's right. Thank you. And that's why he was like hoping they had some kind of fuel in there. And I kind of missed the point where Tom and Judy did turn up as well. So they're the teenage couple, and I kind of insinuated about them earlier. And they kind of arrive. They do arrive on the scene as well, to the farmhouse. So we have 6 players of the piece, 7 if you include Karen.
Yep.
In the equation. So Ben and Tom kind of try and work out a way if they can refuel Ben's truck, and get Harry to kind of basically throw these Molotov kind of cocktails from upstairs at the ghouls to drive them away, essentially, so they kind of get across.
They do not like fire.
They don't like fire.
I think
which
that's one of the elements here that didn't carry across.
No.
When they became the mindless Walking Dead, they stopped caring about things. You know, they stopped using tools until Land of the Dead.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Picking up the machine gun. Yeah, that's when they started
the machine guns. That's so funny that well, we do get a bit of it with Bub, don't we? In Day of the Dead as well. So there is that kind of that there is something still ticking along with the intelligence side of things. This predates that, so you're right. I don't know whether the fire thing is a bit of a nod back to Frankenstein's Monster Day and things like that, because that is intrinsic within his character as well. And, you know, they are, you know, and even Frankenstein's Monster is a nod to the Golem, which was the wooden statue that comes to life. And again, fire is obviously its nemesis because it's made of wood or clay. It's clay, isn't it? Sorry, not wood. But the same kind of thing. It's going to melt and destruct with fire. So it's this kind of, and you know, fire is the first man invented thing that advanced us as a human race. A
weapon, a tool, you know.
You just need to look at 2001: A Space Odyssey and kind of see that kind of, you know, that logical step that Kubrick takes us on. Just to mention him again, yeah. Look, it's so they're trying to, as I said, for good or ill, like, you know, whether it works or not, that this is their plan. They're trying to lure the ghouls away so that they can try and get to this car and hopefully truck and hopefully refuel it. But there's a point in that where Judy follows Tom out, doesn't she, as well? And, you know, Tom kind of somehow he spills the gasoline on the truck, and then the whole thing ignites. There's Tom and Judy are in the truck still trying to drive away from the fuel pump, essentially, and they're able to get out, and the truck just basically explodes, killing them both, and whoever the zombies were around also. But they kind of then start eating their remains and stuff as well. So we're starting to actually see them feeding off. Yeah,
is that the first time we see them eating, doing the cannibalism?
I want to say it was, because up to then they're just attacking them. You know, this is the first time where you actually see that they're actually feeding off them as well.
And it's the first time that they've caught someone, that we've seen catch someone.
That's it. So they kind of kill off the 2 new characters, and you know they're there for a decent amount of time, enough to cause enough angst within the farmhouse. But we're quickly kind of left with the original 5, as it were, again. So Ben tries to get back in the house, but Harry does his whole kind of flip out thing. He's locked Ben outside. But Ben still managed to get his way in, and he basically just kind of really lays into Harry and has a go at him for being a coward. And
it's such a great moment, because Ben kicks the door in, breaks the door in, and immediately has to try and hold off the zombies while he tries and reinforces it. And you just watch Harry in the doorway with the shadows on his face, kind of struggling with the fact of, like, if he doesn't help him, they'll get in and kill them all.
Yeah.
But he just tried to lock this guy out, and he rushes up and helps. And as soon as they've got it nailed in, like, Ben's all business.
Yes.
Once then he just looks at him and lays him out.
Yeah. That's it.
It's great.
It's
such a great
and it's the real pivot point as well, because up to that point there's been this leadership struggle between the two of them. It's the one point where he just puts Harry in his place, you know.
Yeah.
And shortly after that, I think, is when we get the most important bit of zombie folklore that's added to not just the Living Dead series, but everything that's followed afterwards, and that's the about hearing about the single gunshot to the head is what can stop them. And it's something that's, as I said, you see it in every zombie film ever afterwards. It's even something that comes up like often in my discussions with a fellow podcaster, Anthony. He kind of says the problem with zombie films now is that you still have to have the characters not know what a zombie is and explain the rules of that when the audience already knows what those rules are. And so you have this kind of awkward 20-minute period where you have to go through those motions, and there must be a quicker way of doing that without having to go, what's a zombie? You know, when everyone knows what a zombie is when they've gone to see these films. Catch-22, I guess.
Yeah. And then you get like a zombie land, you get self-aware, zombie movies where zombie movies exist.
That's right.
The world. That's the shorthand, because everyone knows. Everyone has a zombie plan.
Zombie plan.
You can't go back. It's like a age of innocence that we can't return to now in cinema.
No, that's it. Never take it back. Once you've lost your zombie virginity, then that's
right. After the first bullet to the head.
That's all right. Oh dear. Okay, so it's also mentioned, obviously, in the same news report, that there are now armed men out patrolling the countryside to try and kind of maintain. Now that they know that this is a way to stop these zombies, there are people out there trying to stop it. We then get this point where the lights go out, and zombies are actually starting to break into the barricades, so they don't have very much longer to kind of hold themselves up against the impending doom that's kind of approaching them. Harry takes a grab for Ben's rifle, and he threatens to shoot Ben. There's a bit of a struggle between the two. They have a bit of a fight. Ben does manage to get the gun away from Harry, and he shoots him.
Which is so intense. It's their chess game of one-upsmanship. Like Ben finishes it, because really, this guy is going to kill him. It's kill or be killed.
That's right.
Because Harry's he is a danger.
He's a danger to everyone involved, and it's it is that kind of tipping point where something's got to be done, and it's an interesting point too, where it is do or die essentially, and we get the conflict has to come to a head at some point. And so Harry kind of stumbles back into the cellar with he's mortally wounded, he's going to die essentially, and he ends up kind of collapsing down next to Karen, his daughter, who's still down in the cellar, and she's died by this point. And the ghouls outside are trying to get to Helen and Barbara through the windows. Helen does kind of free herself. She then also goes down to the cellar for refuge, and that's where she sees her daughter, now reanimated, eating Harry's corpse. Beautiful scene, that bit. I mean, it's a really confrontational, shocking moment.
Iconic.
It's so iconic. And again, this ongoing kind of motif that runs through this is this inability to act, because once again Helen freezes. She doesn't know what to do, and it's this inability to act that's the downfall of most of the people that are here in the film. And so at what point Karen then doesn't she get a trowel or so, like a
she
shovel?
picks
or
up a
something?
trowel and just goes psycho
Yeah,
on the mum. And there's this great her screaming. The mum's scream in that has this great sound effect. It's you haven't heard anything else like it in the film.
Yeah,
but there's that stabbing scene where that was one of the moments in the film where I was like, this is so gruesome. Like especially for 1968. I mean, what if a few years there was Hitchcock had Psycho,
yes,
which this kind of has all of the gore of Psycho tenfold.
Yes.
Like, it's got a corpse. Yeah, we see the corpse right in the beginning of this. The stabbing scene, we see it go in. We see the blood, and it's quite haunting.
Everything just escalates at this point, doesn't it? Like, it's just, this is where like the lid is off, and everything goes crazy.
Everyone's going to within a couple minutes, everything has gone to shit.
Yeah, pretty much. And you see that a lot in you get it a lot in like zombie killer games, like on your Left 4 Deads and stuff like that, where it can get really intense really quite quickly. But yeah, like so like, and what does this say as well? With the Karen killing the daughter, killing her mum, Helen. If the outside world doesn't kill you, then your kids sure as hell will. It's like
a little bit of like Oedipus.
Yeah, definitely. So we basically get the Coopers all kind of basically killed in a very short, succinct moment of time, and then Barbara sees her brother appear at this point too as a reanimated corpse.
And there's a great, like, when we a great sort of character signify that it is him as well. Not because we haven't seen him since the beginning of the movie, but in that beginning he puts on leather like driving gloves.
Yes,
and you just see the gloves, as he kind of comes in. It's just this. Because he's ghouled up. He's all
that's right.
It's all spooky. So it's just that other little visual stimulator in your brain of being like, oh, I remember this guy. I remember watching him put those gloves on, and those gloves that he's grabbing Barbara and dragging her into the.
That's it.
Into the horde.
That's it, and it's such a great, because it's like just at the point where you think Barbara might be snapping out of it. Just at the point where we see, just at the point where Barbara is kind of snapping out of that shock, she's thrust straight back in it when she first sees, her brother as this zombie, and she's right back to square one again. And it's what basically, it leads again is her destruction as he pulls her. It's her past pulling her back in, and destroying her essentially, and as you said, pulled off into the horde, and devoured by the mass that's kind of consumed at this point. And they're starting to really overrun the house, and so Ben's kind of on his own at this point. He's got no option but to go back down into the cellar himself, back where he didn't want to be, as he's kind of fighting off, and does he? Did he end up killing Karen at this point as well? I can't remember if he. Yes. Or did he shut her out? Yeah.
No.
Right.
No. He does. He locks her out because she's come up the stairs and he kind of throws her off.
That's exactly it. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think killing a child might have been a bit too much at the time.
But then 10 years later, it's something he does do. In Dawn of the Dead. And it's one that a scene that Ken Foray, who is the one that shoots those kids in that film, said it was the toughest thing he had to do in that film, which you can completely understand. But yeah, that's right. Yeah, definitely 1968. It wasn't an explored area. So Ben does end up trapped in a cellar where he didn't want to be. He's got no way of getting out, and so he finds himself, as I said, down in there. I think at this point, Helen and Harry start reanimating, and he's forced to shoot them as well and kill them, and he gets through all this stuff, and so he's basically stuck in the cellar. And then we get the next day, essentially, dawn starts to break. So he's made it through the night. And he can hear the posse of gunfire outside. So he's thinking, okay, I'm going to be saved. And so he ventures upstairs.
But we spend a bit of time with that posse as well. Like, we cut over to them for like 5 minutes. Like, it's a significant amount of time where we're watching them, shoot down people and
shoot down. And they're your typical rednecks as well, like American rednecks, and so they're armed to the teeth. They're shooting anything that moves, essentially, and just tossing it onto like the bodies onto a bonfire, burning them all. And you're right. We're with them for a series of time there as well. So Ben kind of hears this going on outside. He ventures upstairs, and one of the posse kind of sees the movement going on in the house, thinks he's a ghoul, and basically shoots him point blank in the forehead, killing him. And as you said, it's a gut-wrenching moment, like you said earlier on. Like, he's gone through all this ordeal only to just be snuffed out like that within the blink of an eye. And then we see his body thrown, to add salt to the wound, his body being thrown onto the pile of corpses and just set ablaze, It's something that hangs so prominently at the end of this movie, and doesn't matter how many times you watch that film, it still gets you. Like it's such a impactful moment.
Watching a character who you've seen just fight tooth and nail the whole way, and like when you watch someone overcome so much, and it's a death that is completely out of their control. There's nothing that he could have done, and having that, the resonance of the civil rights movement of of the time, and so powerful.
You're right. I mean, people have likened it to the the death of Martin Luther King, and with good reason too. Like, we have this very strong African American actor, and character who has been the dominating force. He's been the only sign of hope within the film, and to have hope snuffed out like that is hugely fundamental to the impact of not only the film, but if we are to look at American society, and as I said, the likeness with the death of Martin Luther King, it had a similar effect. This is America at the time at its worst, having to be reborn, but out of what? Out of chaos, and destruction. And where do you go from here? We've had a president shot and killed. We've had an extraordinary pioneer for human decency also kind of killed. It's and it's almost like Romero doesn't offer any answers to that. He just puts it on out there. This is what it is. This is real life, and these things are happening. And it's just incredibly strong moment, as I said in the film. He did apparently draw inspiration from Richard Matheson's I Am Legend.
Oh,
which
really?
Is that's more leaning towards like the vampire plague rather than the zombie plague. But equally, the lead in that as well is a lone island, and ultimately he's killed at the very end. So it's this very kind of downtrodden ending. And so when you know that in mind, you can really see that resonating through Night of the Living Dead. it's as I said, it's a hugely powerful moment. Do you remember the first time you watched that and watched the movie in that moment at all, and how that made you feel?
It was that like just a gut punch of a film, and it was another reason why I got drawn closer in, because I remember growing up, I had a real I was not a fan of any older films. I was just like, that looks old. That's, like, no, thank you. I don't want to watch that. But yeah, this was one of those other ones that been like, wow, like, and even the further you go back in terms of like watching like Twilight Zone episodes, like watch incredible storytelling. And that's what it is. Even though the medium is slightly different, it's got the hallmarks of the time and the context, but great storytelling is still great storytelling, whether it's Romero in the 60s or Greek tragedies, or it's we've had a long time to practice storytelling. We know how to tell one. So it's what it's great.
It's how we without meaning to get too deep, but it's how we learn and adapt as a race as well. Like, you only need to look at like the myths and legends that are told of yesteryear, that are passed down from generation to generation, which all have their morals that people needed to abide by or live by in order to kind of learn from their ancestors. And we see that carried out. Modern day storytelling is predominantly done through film or TV. Again, is kind of obviously having a resurgence again, but it's where most people have accessibility to these things. It's I don't know where I'm going with that. I'm kind of waffling around, but it's just it's a kind of interesting medium. And as you said, when it's done right and done well, it can leave a massive lasting impression. And of course, with this, Romero made a career out of it. He became the godfather of the Dead. Like, there were 6 Dead films that came out under his tutorship and direction. Interestingly, like, the next installment wouldn't be till another 10 years with Dawn of the Dead. And he got a lot of pressure straight after Night of the Living Dead to do sequels, and he was a little opposed to doing it and wanted to explore other things. So we didn't, there's a film called There's Always Vanilla, which he was working on, and then Season of the Witch. Then The Crazies came along in 1973 as well, which is iconic in its own way, and a bit of a forgotten gem, and maybe even more so when the remake came out. It kind of diminished it a little bit more. But when you watch The Crazies, there are definite elements of Dawn of the Dead within that. Which is awesome. And then, like, then he worked on Martin as well, just before Dawn of the Dead came out. And at which point, he, before that, so those films, like, what was that, 1, 2, 3, 4 films basically between, and neither of them really made a mark. And it was only then he was like, maybe I do need to kind of relook at the Dead stuff and see what comes. And we get the gem that was Dawn of the Dead. And we'll save that for another podcast. But he collaborated with Dario Argento within that too. This was they met shortly after Suspiria had came out, and Dawn of the Dead was Dario Argento kind of edited the foreign version of that film, and off the back of that we then get the zombie films that were kind of released, Zombie 2 and Zombie 3, which was another spin-off in a different area. Something we didn't touch on as well is the writer of Night of the Living Dead, John Russo, was also responsible for writing Return of the Living Dead, which also spawned a whole new franchise as well. So there's lots of these kind of fractured stuff that's kind of born out of this is where it began. This was in the initial seed. Without Night of the Living Dead, as I said, you wouldn't have gotten your Walking Deads now. You wouldn't have gotten Shaun of the Dead, which is probably the best homage to that genre, and is a fantastic film. But where do you think it sits today? Like, you were talking about, you easily dismissed older films when you were first coming into the genre. And this is coming from somebody that's a fan of horror as well, So where do you think it sits from a personal point of view, and how would you encourage somebody to go and watch this if they could now?
Like, I probably wouldn't, like, it wouldn't be my go-to recommend for someone who's like, hey, recommend me a horror film. I'm like, I probably wouldn't go there. I'd say it sits more comfortably in horror history, in homework. If you're interested in it,
yes,
then there's a lot to take from it. And I think as a movie watching experience, it still does hold up. But it is, his first film, and you can see a lot of the cracks of a young filmmaker in this.
Yes.
And the low budget sort of restraints that they had, and so it isn't a perfectly film, but I think a lot of charm comes from that.
Yes.
And a lot of creativity came from that, and a lot of incredible moments. And much stuff with the like Ben's character was originally supposed to be a trucker who was really angry, and
that's right,
this complete other thing. And then when Dwayne came in, it changed it for the better so much, in a way that I think like Hollywood almost missed one of the great lessons from that film. They took the zombie stuff but they kind of forgot, this who's African American. He was an intellectual character. He was this portrayal. It kind of got a little bit left behind, whereas the rest of those elements kind of got thrown and thrust into the zeitgeist.
Yep.
But I think I definitely think if you're interested at all in horror history and zombie films at all, I know some people like low budget movies, like they specifically enjoy watching movies that are made on a shoestring, and watching if you like the original Evil Dead, if you like Friday the 13th, watching these movies, I think it does comfortably sit in that kind of realm. And being at the forefront of that horror wave that was like just on the doorstep.
That's right.
That modern horror of gore, of violence, of being like post the Hays Code, like the Hays Code had finished, so now they could kind of show whatever they wanted. My God, did he have fun doing that?
I think that's the thing, and you can see there's fun being made within it, despite how intense and grim the outcome of the film was. You can see that scene, and obviously more so as he was able to have that creativity a bit more and a bit more money behind him as well. Like I think, interestingly, Dawn of the Dead does overshadow Night of the Living Dead, because it's such a, I don't know whether it's my own entry into the Dead genre, but it's such a iconic film, and he had more flexibility. Not only that, but he had Tom Savini coming into the equation as well, and everything that him and his team brought into it as well.
So, and Tom Savini was supposed to be on this one. He auditioned as an actor, but he'd also brought his makeup stuff.
Yes.
And he wasn't drafted into the war.
Yes.
Which is, the fact that, 10 years later they came back and became the collaborators that they did. It's incredible. They really were able to, I think 10 years of time, he was able to come back and be like, okay, he had honed his craft.
Yeah.
He'd made 4 other films. He'd learned so many lessons, and he brought it all for Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. But then, look, that's for another podcast, and we will get to that. I think we're probably at the point where we could wrap up our discussions on Night of the Living Dead. Is there anything else, any lasting kind of comments you'd like to say on the film?
I think that it's I mean, the debt that film owes to this movie is immeasurable. It really did it has shaped our culture in such a massive way. Zombies come back it comes back as a flavor, as a strong flavor.
Yes.
Every decade, every few years. And I strongly recommend, if you haven't watched it, it's, you can get HD versions of it on YouTube, and it's all fine because it's copyright free. There's an excellent video essay about the copyright situation by a guy named Captain with a K, Christian with a K.
Sure.
Has a fantastic video about Night of the Living Dead and copyright. Very interesting.
Nice. I have to check that one out. Thanks for that. And I will kind of echo your point as well, because you mentioned it as well about Friday the 13th and Sean Cunningham. And, these are all people that were so inspired by the low budget kind of know-how and what can be achieved on very little budget, which then made these next wave of pioneers kind of go, I can do that, actually. I can create something out of that. And this is why Romero is so significant within the horror genre, because he was the one that opened that door a little bit for people to look through that crack and go, I can do that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, look, on that note, thank you so much for joining me for the discussions here, Oscar. Once again, I am your lead host, Saul Muerte. And until next time, goodbye. Thanks again, Oscar.
Thanks very much.
You're listening to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. Music supplied by Peter Nezik. For more discussions or podcasts, head over to surgeonsofhorror.com or head over to our Facebook and Twitter sites for the latest news and updates.